War of Attrition, Black September, Yom Kippur War, October War, Lebanese Civil War, 1982, Lebanon War, Islamist uprising in Syria, Mountain War, Operation Desert Storm. The Syrian Army, officially the Syrian Arab Army, is the land force branch of the Syrian Armed Forces. It is the dominant military service of the four uniformed services, controlling the most senior posts in the armed forces, and has the greatest manpower, approximately 80% of the combined services. The Syrian Army originated in local military forces formed by the French after World War I. After France obtained a mandate over the region, it officially came into being in 1945, before Syria obtained full independence the following year. Since 1946, it has played a major role in Syria's governance, mounting 6 military coups, 2 in 1949, including the March 1949 Syrian coup d'état and the August 1949 coup by Colonel Sami al-Hinnawi, and 1 each in 1954, 1963, 1966, and 1970. It has fought 4 wars with Israel and 1 with Jordan. An armored division was also deployed to Saudi Arabia in 1990-91 during the Persian Gulf War, but saw little action. From 1976 to 2005, it was the major pillar of the Syrian occupation of Lebanon. Internally, it played a major part in suppressing the 1979-82 Islamist uprising in Syria, and since early 2011 has been heavily engaged in fighting the Syrian civil war, the most violent and prolonged war the Syrian army has taken part in since its establishment in the 1940s. In 1919, the French formed the Troupes Spéciales du Levant as part of the Army of the Levant in the French Mandate for Syria and the Lebanon. The former, with 8,000 men, later grew into both the Syrian and Lebanese armies. This force was used primarily as auxiliaries in support of French troops, and senior officer posts were held by Frenchmen, although Syrians were allowed to hold commissions below the rank of major. As Syria gained independence in 1946, its leaders envisioned a division-sized army. On June 19, 1947, the Syrian army took the survivors of Pan Am Flight 121 to the Presbyterian Mission Hospital at Deir ez-Zor. The 1st Brigade was ready by the time of the Syrian war against Israel on May 15, 1948. It consisted of 2 infantry battalions and 1 armored battalion. The 2nd Brigade was organized during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and also included 2 infantry battalions and 1 armored battalion. At the time of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the army was small, poorly armed, and poorly trained. Paris had relied primarily on French regulars to keep the peace in Syria and had neglected indigenous forces. Consequently, training was lackadaisical, discipline lax, and staff work almost unheard of. There were about 12,000 men in the Syrian army. These troops were mostly grouped into 3 infantry brigades and an armored force of about battalion size, writes Pollock. Between 1948 and 1967, a series of military coups destroyed the stability of the government and any remaining professionalism within the army. In March 1949, the Chief of Staff, General Husni al-Zain, installed himself as president. 2 more military dictators followed by December 1949. General Adab Shishakli then held power until deposed in the 1954 Syrian coup d'état. Further coups followed, each attended by a purge of the officer corps to remove supporters of the losers from the force. Discipline in the army broke down across the board as units and their commanders pledged their allegiance to different groups and parties. Indeed, by the late 1950s, the situation had become so bad that Syrian officers regularly disobeyed the orders of superiors who belonged to different ethnic or political groups, writes Pollock. The 1963 Syrian coup d'état had as one of its key objectives the seizure of the Al-Kiswa military camp, home to the 70th Armored Brigade. There was another 1966 Syrian coup d'état. However, in 1967 the army did appear to have some strength. It had around 70,000 personnel, roughly 550 tanks and assault guns, 500 APCs, and nearly 300 artillery pieces. The army had 16 brigades, 12 infantry, 2 armored, and 2 mechanized. The Syrian government deployed 12 of the 16 brigades to the Golan, including both armored brigades and 1 mechanized brigade. 3 brigade groups, each comprising 4 brigades, were deployed. the 12th in the north, holding the sector from the Bina Yaakov Bridge to the slopes of Mount Hermon, the 35th in the south from the Bina Yaakov Bridge to the Yarmouk River border with Jordan, and the 42nd in reserve, earmarked for a theater-level counterattack role. During the Six-Day War Israeli assault of the Golan Heights, the Syrian army failed to counterattack the Israelis as the Israelis breached the Syrian positions, while Syrian units fought hard whenever the Israelis entered their fields of fire. No attempts appear to have been made to exploit Israeli disorientation and confusion during the initial assault, judging from reports of 19